This is the
Five Starr
Podcast.
Let me talk to you. This is such good shit.
What do you guys want to talk about?
Changing up the recording format a little bit here. Nothing that's going to affect how anyone watches the show, but for my sake. The only downside is that I'll have to work around the garbage truck crew. But I've had to deal with more obnoxious sounds interrupting the podcast before. I think the best was still the time the crew had to come to replace the door frames at my house, and there was just nothing but loud hammer sounds and heavy machinery infiltrating the background. I can usually work around the yard work in the area, but it's usually subdued. Like lawnmowers, trucks, like that's nothing. But freaking hammers pounding on the walls from like 10 feet away. Yeah, that got annoying pretty quickly. I can't believe I actually put that show out too. I forget how long ago that was now. We do so many shows a week. It's like they all kind of blend together after a while, but I'm sure I'll find it in the archives somewhere. It was one of the earlier shows we did in 2023. It's easy enough to say do it yourself, but no thanks. I think I'll hire a professional that actually knows how to fix the issue. Can I change my own tire? Sure. Could I figure out how to install a new dishwasher? Sure. But I'd rather let a professional with experience do it properly instead of me winding up making the situation worse. And then evidently they do a poor job, so I have to end up calling them back to fix the problem again 2 weeks later. You all know how it goes. So, yeah, y'all ready for another Monday installment? Here to talk about the Retro Raw and whatever we're even calling SmackDown at this point. It's far from retro. It's modern wrestling is what it is. Yeah, I've had a thing or two to say about that show over the past 48 hours. But I think I'll save that rant for when we get to it. Because we have to talk about this Raw show first, and it was not easier to watch compared to what I saw on Friday. So why don't we go ahead and start with that bad boy and knock it out of the park. We'll build up to that SmackDown rant. And boy, are we just coasting through these Raw shows or what? Or is it more like trudging? It's funny how we've been doing these retro Raw reports for like 7 months now. Already feels like we've been doing it for like 5 years. Let's just thank our lucky stars now that these shows are only 45 minutes in runtime. It does make things go by quicker. I will give it that. When you condense a wrestling program down to about an hour with commercials, and you're not sitting there watching them basically try to take an hour's worth of content and then expand that out to 3 hours. Raw being boring for 1 hour is way more tolerable than it being boring for 3. Anybody that's watching the modern product knows what I'm talking about there. But as we look at this particular episode, the April 25th edition from 1994, as advertised in their cold open, Nikolai Volkov as the special guest on Jerry the King Lawler's talk segment. More accurately speaking, Nikolai Volkov with hair. It's almost kind of surreal going back and watching wrestling footage when Nikolai actually had hair. It was very odd. But yeah, that was our opening pitch to hook viewers in. Stick around, folks. You're going to get to see Lawler berate Nikolai Volkov on live television. Surely couldn't be any worse than last week's King's Court, where Medusa was out there putting everyone into a coma with that boring monologue. But, did I just call her Medusa by accident? Sorry, force of habit. Alundra Blaze. Same person, doesn't matter. But we'll get to the Lawler stuff later on. First, we got to talk about this opening match. A hell of a TV opener this was. It is Jeff Jarrett versus Razor Ramon. Non-title. Once I got past the minor annoyance of the commentator's audio only getting piped in through one earpiece. One of those things where you think there's something wrong with your hardware and you're like, nope, it's totally on them. They had a major audio gaffe for the entire of the show and they never fixed it. So if you were watching the show and your left headset wasn't working properly, you're basically watching the show without any commentary. Which may be good or bad depending on how you view it. If this were 2023 WWE commentary, I'd take it in a heartbeat. In 1994, Vince and Macho were mildly tolerable as a commentary team. Nowhere near as good as when Bobby the Brain was there, but I mean, no one could ever match Bobby as a color commentator. But this is just a great TV match with two pros that knew what they were doing in the ring. I mean, it's easy to simplify the conversation down to that, but that's exactly what it was. I mean, you heard me give my controversial takes on Double J before. The one thing you've never heard me deny was that the guy was a very good professional wrestler. Now, when it came to card positioning and pushes, that's another matter entirely, but as a grassroots pro wrestler, it's the one quality about Jeff Jarrett that I can never take away from him. The guy could work. And he and Razor went out there and tore the house down. You know, it's not a 5-star classic or anything. It's not winning match of the year in the Observer Awards. But you're going to hear me talk about this a little later on when we do the SmackDown report. Talking about how meaningless so many of the TV matches are in wrestling nowadays because everything's virtually a throwaway. Once in a blue moon, you'll get those kinds of high-caliber main event style matches on a Raw or a SmackDown that you can just sit back and watch without constantly having to be reminded about how dull the business is today, where the talent pool is so lacking in so many areas. Here in 1994, despite all the bad crap going on at the time, you still had some really good athletes for that period in the business. Two guys that were stars in their own right. You know, Razor obviously being the more accomplished as an overall package, even though he was never a world champion through any major organization. And, you know, he was obviously getting the bigger push around this period, so you kind of figured he was going to be the center of attention. But I watched this match, barely took any notes on what happened, because at the end of the day, note-taking really wasn't needed. It was very old school in terms of the layout, nothing flashy or overproduced, but it had energy. The crowd was into everything they did. They were super into Razor during the comeback. Yeah, you talk about all the subtle things in wrestling that you really don't see a lot of the time anymore when it comes to working crowds and milking the important moments in matches. Like the spot where Jeff's got Razor in the sleeper hold and they're not in a rush to get to the next spot. They stay on it for a while. Razor's fading. They got the camera zooming in on him so you could see the struggle. You know, Double J's applying more pressure. And when Hebner finally goes to do the arm raise spot and Razor manages to hold it up before the final drop, the crowd pops because they're staying with Razor and they're cheering him on to stay alive. You know, like I said, Razor was being factored into the storyline material with Shawn and Diesel around this time. So, you know, you figured they were going to get involved here somehow. So Jarrett ends up pulling Razor out to the floor by his trunks. And while he's out there selling, Shawn comes waltzing down the aisleway to taunt him. And Razor winds up decking Shawn with a stiff right hand. He's firing back on Jarrett, and doing the one-man wrecking crew stuff for a minute or two. And of course, he ends up getting Shawn in the ring and throws him around for a bit. Now, of course, Hebner's standing right there watching it all happen and doesn't bother calling for the DQ until Diesel hits the ring and actually physically touches Razor. And at that point, he throws the match out. One of those WWF, WWE details in matches that always kind of stuck in my craw as a fan over the years. The whole idea that you can jump into a ring while a match is going on and it'll continue so long as you're the one getting your ass kicked. But by God, the moment you lay a finger on the person working the match, that tears it. It's the argument of, I can bring a shotgun into the ring and point it at the guy's fucking cranium. That's not a DQ. But by God, the moment I pull that trigger, that's it. Throw the match out. We're done here. But looking past that quirky detail, the heelers are ganging up on Razor. Diesel plants him with a couple jackknife power bombs. And, that was kind of their go-home angle to hype up the Diesel-Razor title match for that coming weekend. A match that wound up resulting in a title switch, if I'm not mistaken. Which I know is kind of a dirty spoiler, but, since we're not reviewing WWF Superstars, I don't feel as guilty. But boy howdy, that Diesel push. Boy, did that Diesel push take off from this point forward. And I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with Kevin Nash's career in the WWF by this point, the whole timeline of the push. But when you look at that whole trajectory of Nash's run in '94, he was the guy. At least that's what Vince was trying to get over. And he was still a heel by this point. Not for much longer. Even in that quick pre-tape promo after the commercial where Shawn's pumping up the title match and guaranteeing that Diesel was going to walk out with the strap. He wasn't lying. We all know Shawn did plenty of lying and manipulating throughout his career. But he was not wrong there. This is their way of ensuring you that if you weren't sold on Diesel prior to everything they shot at WrestleMania, you were going to be by the end of the year. And, no. I have my own personal takes on the push of Kevin Nash as a main eventer in the WWF. Mostly the simple fact that it fucking sucked. And I think, judging by their pay-per-view sales and ratings with him as the top champion, it was not in the minority there. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. From there, it was kind of back to the regular Monday Raw format for a while. We had that hot opener to kick things off, and then we followed it with some filler material that really didn't amount to all that much. Bam Bam Bigelow had a quick squash against Tony DeVito, which was mostly just an infomercial for them to promote the Head Shrinkers getting their tag team title match with the Quebecers next week. President Jack Tunney was on the phone to make the announcement here. And you had to figure the Quebecers were not going to be too happy about that call. It did leave us with the funny visual of seeing Johnny Polo in the back with Jacques and Pierre. And of course, you picture all the wacky outfits we've seen Polo wear on television before. Here, button-down shirt, no tie, and an olive-colored blazer. I said to myself, ooh, he must be serious now. He's breaking out the formal attire for the occasion. It would also seem that the Head Shrinkers and the Quebecers are no longer friends. Bummer. But hey, in completely unrelated news, WWF absolutely not trying to drum up any positive publicity for the company, try to babyface the fuck out of the organization during the whole steroid scandal that, for the record, was still ongoing by this point. More charity plugs. Yes. The WWF working side by side with the local Stanford Library to raise $60,000 for a community charity work because of their generosity, kindness, and community spirit. totally not geared to try and steer away any bad publicity for the company. Absolutely not. Pay no attention to the ongoing steroid trial. Nothing to see here, folks. Gotta love that clever business tactic. Vince is a genius. Say what you want about the guy. Never the heel in any situation. Unless it suits his financial needs. Then from there, we're immediately back to the ring for a Heavenly Bodies squash. They wrestled Jason Headings and John Paul. Again, just kind of more filler. Big fan of the Heavenly Bodies myself, but by this point in the WWF, they were just kind of sporadically showing up for the sake of it. You know, they were back in Smoky Mountain not too long after this anyway, and I don't think they were ever back in the WWF to work any major programs afterwards. And again, kind of just an opportunity for Vince to bring up some of the ongoing story material on the show. This is where we found out the kayfabe rationale for justifying why the Lex Luger Mr. Perfect feud never happened. All that time they spent building it up on TV post WrestleMania 10. Now we come to find out that they've narrowed everything down to Mr. Perfect no showing an event where he was scheduled to face Luger. Therefore, he was indefinitely suspended. And of course, that's basically their cop-out way to cover up for the fact that he was going through some injuries and basically prevented him from getting cleared to wrestle again. And looking back, there might have been some contractual issues with him wanting more money and Vince not wanting to pony up the cash for it. That's hearsay, but one of those two stories is confirmed for fact. But now we come to find out that it's going to be Crush that gets put into that spot. So instead of Luger versus Perfect, we are now getting Luger versus Crush. Which for my money is like trying to substitute a ribeye steak for a fucking bottom sirloin. Any meat lovers out there will know what I'm talking about. I'm a filet guy myself, but I know not everybody digs filet. In any case, all the talk about the Luger Perfect feud getting the kibosh was more interesting than anything that happened in this match. Heavenly Bodies went over and they immediately pitched to their WWF WrestleMania Revenge VTR. At which point we come back for our featured segment on the show, the King's Court interview with Jerry Lawler and Nikolai Volkov. We've seen a lot of the cameos with Nikolai showing up on Raw and sitting in the front row for months, just kind of hanging out as a fan watching the shows. They've always acknowledged that he was there. For what purpose other than to just be a casual viewer? That was not really explained yet. So Lawler brings him into the ring, and he begins running him down and working the Lawler heel roll. Great heat magnet that guy was. And he's poking fun at the fact that Nikolai has stumbled through some hard times recently, specifically financial hard times. And after Volkov takes the verbal lashing, he basically fires back by saying that he's made some bad investments and things haven't been so great for him lately, but he still has his health. And that's enough for him to challenge Lawler anytime, any place. And you got Lawler basically raking Nikolai over the coals, saying that he's begging for a job with the WWF because he's broke. And, once you get past the broken English, this was kind of their way to introduce this as an ongoing story on TV for Nikolai. The whole bankruptcy, hard times thing was obviously kayfabed, but this is kind of the early stages for what they were eventually setting up for later on in the year, so I won't give away too much now because of where it's all going. I will say, though, had you been watching this live in '94 for the first time, like myself, you probably got done watching this segment and wondered, what the hell did any of this accomplish? And the answer at the time was, not a whole lot. aside from planting a bullshit sob story in everybody's head that Nikolai Volkov, wrestling legend, went broke because he did not invest his money smartly. To which, as a 7 or 8-year-old watching at home, I had no idea what the fuck any of that meant. I barely even knew who Nikolai Volkov was in 1994, much less buying the idea that he was struggling financially and was begging for a job with Vince because he had nowhere else to go. And, well, the whole thing doesn't get any more coherent from here. So if you are confused now, just wait until the story unfolds. Now, Lawler being a dick is always fun, but that's all I really got out of this as a kid. But even so, considering this was right around the point where Nikolai was kind of winding his career down, watching him do a springboard jump over the top rope to the floor, I was like, holy shit. Dude can still move. Very agile big man Nikolai was in his heyday. I think it's easy to forget that. And the visual of him with hair never gets any easier to witness. It's so bizarre. Speaking of winding things down, let's wind down this Raw report by getting through the next couple segments. We had a 1-2-3 Kid versus Dwayne Gill squash that was kind of mid. Maybe it would have worked if he was Gilbert instead. Or maybe not. Vince was more preoccupied here making Roseanne references. They also plugged some USA film that I kind of blanked on paying attention to. And Sean Waltman won with the spinning wheel kick. Which quickly brought us to one of the more standout moments of this week's Raw. A promo at a local deli market plugging an Undertaker cameo, wherein we learned that the Undertaker apparently stopped in for a 6-foot wedgie, according to Vince's own words. He meant a 6-foot wedge. I'm not making that up. They actually filmed a 45-second pre-tape of some geek working at the local meat market telling us that he saw The Undertaker order a sandwich. Now, of course, we never actually saw him here. But we did learn that The Undertaker apparently does not like pickles. We also learned that giving local Subway workers promo time on WWF television is probably not the best use of TV time. Still, I'll give the guy credit. He cut a better rehearsed promo than a lot of the boys could do in today's business. But yeah, this is really fucking stupid. And I say that as a diehard Taker fan. This was just bad. It was worth it to hear Vince McMahon butcher the name of a sandwich, though. Aside from that, why this existed, I have no idea. But as we prepare ourselves for the upcoming Smoke and Mirrors Spoopy Taker cameos, our TV main event this week was Owen Hart beating Rich Myers. More accurately speaking, beating the ever-loving shit and wiping the mat with Rich Myers. Boy, did this Owen Hart have a vendetta this week. He ended up going over with a one-armed sharpshooter, which is pretty dang awesome. I also like the visual of him putting the shades on Myers' face after he won. They cut away from it too quickly, but yeah, that was kind of that. And then it kind of segued into the final angle, where Captain Lou Albano was at ringside with Vince and Macho, hyping up the big title match next week. Head Shrinkers versus the Quebecers. Signed, sealed, and soon to be delivered. And while he's way too enthusiastic about this upcoming title match, he begins trying to stick his tongue down Vincent Savage's throat. Thankfully, Johnny Polo came down and saved the day. So he gets in Albano's face and stirs up some trouble. And as he's fuming over him politicking his way into getting Jack Tunney to sign off on that title match, Savage gets in Polo's face, and he ends up restraining him so that Lou can punch him. And down goes Polo selling. coming precariously close to hitting the back of his head off the concrete, which looked like no fun. And, well, right as the champs come down to ringside, the show pretty much cuts off before anybody else comes to blows. But I'll give him credit for hyping up that big title match next week. You know, they've been building it for a while on TV, so we're finally going to get to see the blow-off for it. I cannot remember for the life of me how that whole situation went down or pretty much anything about the tag team scene in the WWF by this point. They had a lot of teams, that's for sure. But in terms of who had the belt at what given period, dude, fuck if I remember. The WWF tag division is a complete blur from like 92 onward for me. By the time we get to like 97, 98, I mean, they were doing rapid fire title switches so often, it honestly didn't even matter who had the fucking belts by that period. Not with all the makeshift teams they had going on. But there you have it. Elsewise, the show was one of those cases where it starts off with something relatively hot for the open, and there's like another 35 minutes of dreck after the fact. Kind of the show in a nutshell. Not to say there was anything outlandishly horrible outside the deli skit, but at least that was only like 30 seconds. It's just kind of more of the same when it comes to a lot of pointless squashes, a lot of underneath material that's hard to get invested in, given the nature of the business by this period and all the cartoon personalities going around. And I keep beating this talking point to death, how things only get demonstrably worse from this point onward. But, I mean, that's why you're taking the slow burn ride with me. We're still in the process of the decline. Just wait until we get to post-SummerSlam. Boy, does it all come barreling downhill in a hurry. Speaking of barreling downhill, guess we should talk about SmackDown, huh? From whatever the date was on Friday, April 21st, looks like. Damn. So close to 420. Which is exactly what I needed when I was watching this thing. And it's not just because Matt Riddle was in the main event. I think I more so needed the weed just to try and convince myself that I was watching a different episode of SmackDown. I'm not kidding you. I got 20 minutes into this thing, and I wasn't entirely convinced that I wasn't just watching a rerun of last week. And I even remember saying last time, the common complaint that I have about virtually every SmackDown show, it's the same fucking people every week on the show. The same people interacting in almost virtually the same segment. Everything's interchangeable. There's no creativity to anything that goes on. It's the same dry, lather, rinse, repeat formula every week. I mean, I'm basically at the point now where if I wanted to, I could just save all of my notes from all the SmackDown shows, and by the time the following week rolls around, I could probably just cut and paste everything verbatim and it wouldn't be all that different. Take the opener as an example for this week. It's Damian Priest and Finn Balor versus Santos Escobar and WWE Hall of Famer Rey Mysterio, which I guess is going to be Rey's new moniker in WWE from now on. They're just going to keep beating us over the head with the fact that he's a WWE Hall of Famer, because they apparently all think we have amnesia and forgot when he was inducted into the Hall of Fame, 3 weeks ago. But again, it's Rey Mysterio and the Legado lackeys versus some combination of the Judgment Day. Correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, I know I'm dumb, but I do remember things that happened, all of 7 days ago. Did we literally not just see Damian Priest versus Santos Escobar last week? Now a week later, they're essentially wrestling again. Only this time they threw Balor and Rey in there thinking it was going to make any world of difference. After we've already seen these factions touch on practically every show since they started fighting? I mean, I know this isn't a new concept when it comes to WWE booking, but goddamn is it annoying. I mean, the wrestling was fine, but that's not the point. It's the simple fact that I'm sick of seeing the same people touch. I'm over it. They've exhausted this Judgment Day stuff to the point where now they're just starting to generate go-away heat with me. After over a year, I still don't have a fucking clue who the cult leader is, if there even is one. And all of it to set up what? I presume what'll wind up being either Priest and Balor or Priest and Dominic versus Mysterio and Bad Bunny for that WrestleMania Backlash special. If that's something you're remotely interested in seeing, which I'm not. It's hilarious how badly both of the major American wrestling organizations are totally missing the mark when it comes to booking TV. On one side, you have the WWE booking the same people in the exact same matches every week on the show to the point where you stop caring. And on the other side, you got AEW, where they sporadically book guys on the show and then they disappear for like 6 months and we rarely see them again. And then because you don't see them for long stretches of time, you stop caring about them. Go figure. If only we had a happy medium. So anyway, here's what happened at the finish. Babyfaces are making the comeback, and while Ray's over in the heel's corner, Balor ends up getting a blind tag to Priest, and of course Ray and Escobar don't see the tag, so after Ray hits Balor with a 619, he tags Escobar so that he can hit the splash. And then in every WWE finish you've ever seen in the last 15 years, Priest shoves Ray into the ring post so he can crawl into the ring, hit Escobar with the South of Heaven, and pin him. So yes, in other words, Damian Priest stole the pin. Because we've never seen that fucking uncreative finish a million times before. I also believe this is the third consecutive job that Escobar has done to Damian Priest in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Again, correct me if I'm lying. So whoever's cup of coffee that guy took a dump in, hope he learned his lesson. Because with the way they've gone about beating Escobar lately, you'd figure that guy's contract is coming due soon. I don't know that to be the case, but they're sure beating him to a pulp. And then there's Ray. I mean, you almost got to feel bad for the guy. Literally after getting the clean win over his son at WrestleMania, now he's just right back to being just another guy on the show. It took him 3 weeks to do that. My God. That was basically the first 20 minutes of the show, give or take. The Judgment Day is still a thing, and I have no idea why. Pretty soon it's going to be a toss-up between them and the New Day as worst modern-day wrestling gimmick that won't die a death. I mean, the New Day's been a thing since I was in fucking training diapers. So with any luck, maybe the Judgment Day will get canned by the time I start filing for Social Security. But until that day comes, speaking of the Judgment Day, guess who wants a women's championship match against Rhea Bloody Ripley? That's right. Zelina Vega. Well, in completely unrelated news, in WWE's next chapter of Let's Find Random Shit for Karrion Kross to Do, he's now apparently going to be feuding with Shinsuke Nakamura. Because, yeah, what the heck, why not? I mean, everything else he's done up to this point has been useless. So, why not putting him in another meaningless underneath feud that no one could possibly care about? Now, there were a couple other things that I skipped over here. Nothing important, but there was like a solid 5 minutes of TV time before they even got to the ring again for more action. And boy howdy, this next match. It's Ricochet and Brawny the Strowman versus the Viking Raiders. Speaking of pinning the same cast of characters against each other in the same fucking matches over and over again. I could have sworn that I've seen these guys wrestle each other like 37 times prior to this, but who knows? Maybe I only dreamt that. I remember Van Halen spoofing Ricochet on TV not that long ago. Because, you know, that's the kind of thing you'd expect to see on a wrestling program. 110-pound girls scaring grown-ass adult men. The usual. So anyway, this match sucked. My first note for the match reads as follows. Horrible indie-looking windmill punches from Strowman and Frodo. Or is it Ivan I'm thinking of? The Viking Raider with the ponytail that I think used to go by Hanson. Whatever that guy's name is now. Yeah, his punches looked like shit. As did Strowman's. Everything Strowman does, man, it looks like he's wrestling in quicksand. I've watched videos at half speed that go by faster than half the stuff that guy does in the ring. Not to mention that spot. And I think you all know the one I'm talking about. The one that's going to be making headlines is the next feature on Botchamania. The Braun Strowman Phantom heel turn, where he tried to beel Ricochet into the ring from the apron and completely missed one of the Viking Raiders because he wasn't in the right spot. Because everyone fucking sucks at their jobs anymore. Now, you could easily blame the Raiders for not being in position, but I just want you to imagine this for a second. You're in the back putting this match together, and you're like, I got a great idea for a spot, gang. My partner is going to pick me up from the apron, and he's going to launch me over the top rope and send me flying into you guys, and you're going to catch me and take a bump. Sounds good in theory, huh? Not taking into account the fact that in order for this spot to work, I have to basically trust that the guy getting thrown is going to be coming at me in a way that I can feasibly catch him. Which basically means, if you're coming at me through the air feet first, I don't give a fuck who's doing the throwing. I ain't catching that motherfucker with a 10-foot pole. You come flying at me feet first, I'm protecting myself at all costs. Fuck you. I'm not about to risk a concussion because you had an idea for a stupid spot that only had like a 25% chance of actually working. You know, here's a novel idea. Okay, so you're in the locker room talking about doing this spot. How is it that nobody stepped up and said, wait a minute? There's probably a reason that we've never seen anybody try this before. And you'd be correct. The answer is because it's fucking stupid. And dangerous. But mostly stupid. So that was embarrassing. I laughed at it. The crowd just sort of groaned. I mean, even the announcers couldn't hide how botched it looked. I mean, Wade Barrett all but said, "What the hell was that?" without actually saying it. And while we're on the subject of burying Strowman's rotten ring work, did you all catch him completely whiffing a big boot during the comeback spot? Thank God for WWE's rapid-fire camera cuts. Frickin' blind dude could have seen that. Of course, he also had to do all his running shoulder block spots on the floor, which is always dumb. And, basically, here's what happened at the finish. Van Halen ran a distraction by screaming at Strowman. The heels then cut him off. They hit their assisted splash Delia Bob for a 2 3/4 count. Ricochet wound up getting another hot tag so he could flip-flop and fly around for a little bit. And then he and Strowman did some sloppy double-team spots at the end and won with something. I don't even remember. Match was hideous. The only thing I said after it was over Well, first I said, thank God it's over. Second thing I said was, given the state of WWE's tag division at the moment, both brands, not just SmackDown exclusively, I can only hope to God they are not actually considering giving Strowman and Ricochet a title run. Can you picture Owens and Zayn trying to carry that big lumbering oaf to a watchable fucking match? I'd be paying those guys extra. And by the way, did I say title reign or title run? I meant title shot. Good fucking Lord, I hope they wouldn't be stupid enough to put the belts on those guys. No offense to Ricochet, but yeah, after this debacle, I'm not really in a rush to see those guys have a title reign of any kind. I mean, if they are going to do that match, idiot-proof it as much as possible. Keep Ricochet in there to do most of the work and keep Brawny on the apron. Have him pass out paper towels to people in the front row. You might save a lot of time and trouble that way. And possible medical expenses. So after that debacle, I needed a little bit of a palate cleanser. And when I saw the next match was going to be a girls' tag match for the belts, with Liv Morgan of all people being involved, I looked down at my invisible watch and said, man, now that you mention it, I've been meaning to scrub down the bathroom for quite a while now. Yeah, what the hell? I got 15 minutes to spare. May as well do the deed now. And wouldn't you know it, folks? Shoot. I missed the match. What a bummer. And I was really looking forward to reviewing it too. You know, there's always next time. There's always next time. So I came back in time to see the top of the hour match with Gunther and Xavier Woods for the Intercontinental Championship, which would not have been my first choice for a Gunther title defense. Or my second. Or third. Or even 59th. With that all said, we've all seen Gunther wrestle. And that guy sort of has a reputation for making chicken salad out of chicken shit a lot of the time. And while this was not a 5-star classic or anything, admittedly, it was probably the best thing I've seen Xavier Woods do in a long time. If I remove any of my hatred for all the pancakes and the trombones and the rainbows and the goofy ass slapping, I can actually buy Xavier as a somewhat sympathetic underdog babyface. He did a very fine job working the Ricky Morton role in there. And that's the thing about Xavier that kind of pisses me off too. I've seen the guy wrestle for years. What was he in TNA? I forget what his name there. It was Creed, right? Consequences Creed. That's right. Yeah, he wrestled for their X division for a period of time. The guy was really good. And I liked him there. I don't remember a whole lot of what he did prior to his run in WWE where, you know, they didn't already sap him with the New Day gimmick. But my God, that stuff is just such turn the channel heat for me. And then I'm reminded occasionally, like, yeah, the guy's actually a good wrestler. I wish we would see more of the serious side of him instead of the other stuff. And obviously we all know that Gunther's specialty is chopping the shit out of everybody, and that's basically what the match was built around. Woods sold everything great. Got to make a little fiery comeback at the end there. He got cut off momentarily trying to go up top, but ended up catching Gunther off guard and was able to land a really nice-looking top rope leg drop. Looked even better when they replayed it in slow motion again. Couple nice false finishes at the end there. And after Gunther countered a roll through, a nice simple sleeper hold to put away Woods and retain the belt. Nothing flashy, nothing crowd stunning, just a good old-fashioned pro wrestling maneuver. Now granted, we've seen plenty of guys win with sleepers, but in the case of Gunther, you know, at least his sleeper looks believable. I mean, having that fucking grizzly bear wrapped around your entire body, you'd be out snoring before you could say uncle. Now, of course, nobody actually suspected that Woods was winning this match, but you can definitely see the motive of what they've got for Gunther's long-standing title reign. I mean, you have to expect he'll eventually get to a point where somebody will be ready to beat him for the belt later on, whether that's an NXT call-up like a Braun Breaker, whether that's a Cody if they decide to immediately not have him win the Universal title. I mean, there's a laundry list of ways they could go. With the draft coming up, I think it's next week, right? I wouldn't be surprised if maybe a Breaker showed up and immediately challenged Gunther for the belt, or I don't know, maybe if they swapped somebody over from Raw, they could always do that too. Who's a young prospect on the Raw side of things that could have a credible title match against Gunther? I mean, Austin Theory comes to mind, but isn't he still the U.S. champion right now? Not really sure. But, yeah, we'll see what they do. You know, whether or not they make the right judgment call when they eventually decide to take the belt off of him, that's yet to be determined. I mean, WWE has a history of screwing up guys by taking titles off of them at inopportune times. God, if Vince is trying to influence creative, I mean, you know he'll evidently fuck that one up. But until that day comes, I'm enjoying this Gunther title reign. It's not really rocket science with what they're doing, but it's working. It's effective. Yeah, good match. Very good match. On this show, it was like watching Bret Hart and Austin at WrestleMania all over again. Which I know is faint praise, but God, after that fucking Strowman match, I kind of needed this to regain my sanity a little bit. Unfortunately, the sanity was lost shortly thereafter, because it was right back into the doldrums again. And I really hate being that guy, but yeah, this Usos promo. You know, far be it for me to say that I'm an expert in the field of freestyle rap. Out of every musical subgenre, I'd probably place rap at the very bottom of the totem pole when it comes to stuff that I actually enjoy listening to. That and Tuvan throat singing. They're both equally wretched. But, you know, we've seen Jimmy and Jay come out to do these freestyle rap promos on TV for a long time now, and I mean, they're not obnoxiously bad, but I always have a hard time picking up on like half the dialogue a lot of the time, partially because there's a lot of slang in their delivery and it kind of goes over my head. The other problem too is that occasionally when they get into some kind of rhythmic groove, I'll find myself sitting there bebopping my head but not really paying attention to what they're saying. And then after they get done talking, I'm like, wait, what the hell did they just say? And then I'll have to rewind it again and listen back to it. Now, they didn't really say a whole lot here. You know, they came out to hype the six-man tag for the Backlash show, as well as the WrestleMania rematch next week with Owens and Zayn for the belts. Because, well, that's more modern wrestling logic for you. Give away the title match on free TV so that you can build up to a six-man at the premium live special with nothing at stake. Except bragging rights, I guess. So translation, expect some kind of fucked finish in that main event next week. And we'll talk about the main event for this show in a minute, but I just want to address this briefly since we're on the subject of the bloodline stuff. And yet again, I'm going to trace this conversation back to what we said at the beginning of the program, talking about how my biggest gripe with these SmackDown shows, how everything post-WrestleMania to where we are now, it's a lot of repetition. It's the same people in the same matches, in the same feuds, every week. And you know, the bloodline stuff is particularly frustrating for me because this was one of the hottest things going on before WrestleMania. And now that we've seen the fallout, maybe I'm just overly cynical at this point in my life, but has there ever been a period where the bloodline has been any colder than where we are right now? Mostly because I'm yet to really figure out how or why this group is still a thing. I mean, it served its purpose to build up to some of the big blow-offs in Mania with the 2 separate title matches. In the case of Cody and Roman, we all saw how that ended. But even in the case of Sami and Owens beating the Usos for the belts, we actually got a satisfying payoff to that storyline. The babyfaces won. So, why is the feud continuing? What is there left to resolve? The heels lost clean, new champs, new fresh possibilities afterwards, and yet here we are. And we're right back to the well with the Usos in the title picture yet again. For no other reason than we have no other credible title challengers at the moment. And I'm not even saying that you couldn't eventually do a rematch with these two teams. But, I mean, for God's sake, can you give it like 5 or 6 months? Maybe wait until SummerSlam at the earliest? Instead of just wasting it on free television like 3 weeks later after we already saw it at WrestleMania, where it's not fresh at all? Because right now, hate to say it, this shit is really stale. Everyone's sick of this right now. We've seen Owens, Zayn, Jimmy, and Jay on every show since January. Before that even. Interacting together, fighting, arguing, doing something. But it's every week. There's no breakup of the monotony. We've needed to explore new options for a long time and give this feud a rest. Quite frankly, I've talked about this a million times. I've needed a break from the Usos for well over a decade. Yes, they are arguably doing the best work of their careers right now, but at some point, you got to call a spade and say, is this really the only team you can put at the top of the division? The Usos have needed to go away for a long time now, and we're basically at the point where every time I see them, I just groan. And I hate to say that considering how integral they've been to the overall bottom line of SmackDown in the last year, but then you also look at the reality. Without Roman or Sami or Owens or Heyman involved, when you just look at the Usos by themselves, they're sort of a hindrance. You know, they work in moderation when they've got other members of the crew to bounce off of, but the standalone Uso segments, they're just tiresome. It's the same shit every time with them. I mean, I've been saying that about their matches for God knows how long. But even their promo segments at this point are just kind of blech. You know, even when you throw in Solo Sikoa, it doesn't really help him out all that much. Because Sikoa's still green and doesn't really have the ability to carry a segment by himself. There's potential there, but I mean, he's far from being at the top of the pecking order. Which I guess would be a good time to talk about the main event. Remember me talking earlier how I said I wasn't convinced that I wasn't just watching a replay of last week's show? Remember how last week's TV main event was Matt Riddle versus Solo Sikoa? Well, guess what our genius creative team came up with for a main event this week? That's right. It's Matt Riddle versus Solo Sikoa. Again. Oh, but this time, it's no DQ. Because that apparently makes a difference. Even though it doesn't. They can just hit each other over the head with shit and not get punished for it. I mean, we all know the drill. It's basically a lazy way of rematching the same guys because the writers can't come up with something better because they also suck at their jobs. It also started with my favorite opening spot in these kinds of matches, Jumpstart Attack, where the babyface attacks the heel from behind like a coward. And keep in mind too, this is 1 week removed from the angle they shot where Riddle got buried underneath a 400-pound announce desk. Basically left for dead. Comes out here this week to fight Solo Sikoa. Perfectly fine. He's not limping. He's not bandaged up from the attack. He's not selling anything. Just going out there and beating up Sikoa like nothing ever happened. And because this is a modern-style no DQ match, it's also a lazy way for them to involve plunder and just turn the match into a standard garbage match. Kendo sticks, chairs, tables. It was all at play here. As always, it's all just hanging out underneath the ring for these guys' convenience. Although I did appreciate Sikoa trolling the fans by shoving the table back under the ring when Riddle went to pull it out. That effectively pissed everybody off. But even so, they did every hardcore spot you've ever seen in a modern match, including the deal where the guy catches the chair and holds it in front of his face so the other guy can kick it, because that spot never looks fake as fuck. They also did some stupid shit involving chairs that were just way too reckless and dangerous for a throwaway TV match that nobody's going to remember 3 weeks from now. Like Riddle giving Sikoa an overhead throw onto 2 open folding chairs. Why? Like even the spot where Riddle tried to dogpile the chairs onto Sikoa and tease that he was going to give him a bro taunt from the top rope. Now, of course, you look down and you see that several of the chairs have the legs sticking upward. So if Riddle actually tried to land on the thing, he would have probably fucking impaled himself. So thank God Sikoa rolled out of the ring. If this were AEW, they would have tried the spot anyway and someone would have died. But they end up doing a ridiculous spot on the floor where Sikoa tries to flip the announce table over onto Riddle again, but Riddle was able to somehow fend it off through the power of his feet. I'm not kidding. They tried to sell us on the idea that Riddle's legs and feet were stronger than all of Sikoa's body weight put together, trying to flip this table over onto him. Like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. But Riddle manages to, turn the table, no pun intended there. He ends up flipping the announce desk onto Sikoa and buries him under the rubble. And that brings out the Usos to jump Riddle 2-on-1. Evidently, Riddle fends them off. It also brings up the obvious question, if it's no DQ, why didn't the Usos just immediately hit the ring from the opening bell and beat the shit out of Riddle? I'm just saying. But again, if I tried to poke holes in every logic gaffe, we'd be sitting here talking about this shit until 2 a.m. But, well, somewhere in that mess, Sikoa managed to rise from the dead and shove the announce desk off of him. He ends up making a beast mode comeback on Riddle in the last minute or so. And as Riddle catches Sikoa with a knee to the face, Sikoa fires back and hits him with something that may or may have not been the Oriental Spike. And then he pinned him. Could have been the Spike, could have been a lariat, I don't really know. All I know is that, yes, you heard that correctly, they beat Riddle again. His second match since coming back from suspension, and they've already got him doing 2 jobs in a row. So obviously that guy's still in the doghouse. And I believe with approximately 45 seconds left of airtime, because apparently they did not garner enough heat already, after they beat Riddle essentially clean, they also had the Usos put him through a table with a 1D. Because, heat. Yeah, I got to make sure we get enough of that. I mean, pretty much the exact same way they closed out last week's program. Almost an exact carbon copy, minus the announce desk spot at the end. Now, yes, they also mentioned that Owens and Zayn were not here, Hence the lack of run-in help to save Riddle at the end. I can't remember if they ever explained why they weren't on the show, but for whatever reason, they were absent. But that's all I have to really say about that. A literal cut and paste version of the same thing they aired last week. This time with weapons. And I just got done watching the show and thought to myself, had I chosen not to watch this show, would I have missed anything? Give or take a moderately good Gunther title match with Xavier Woods. Was there anything else on the show that I desperately needed to watch? Something that I had to make sure that I went out of my way to see in order to stay up to date with current storylines? Virtually nothing was different from last week. If you did a side-by-side comparison from this week or from last week's SmackDown to this week's SmackDown, you put both of those shows in front of me and asked which one aired first, I honestly might have had to think about it. Because they were so identical, it'd be almost impossible to tell had you not already watched both shows. And this isn't really just a problem that I've had with WWE in the last 2 or 3 months. This has been a thing for like 10 years. It's why I've gotten so sour on WWE television. It's why I got burnt out from watching Raw every fucking Monday night. Every show for 3 hours, the same garbage every week. All the segments are generically put together. Everything is so watered down and overly produced. I mean, you really get the sense that you can miss Raw and not feel gypped by the end. And I can't believe I'm even going to bring this up, but it's not like how the WWF used to be back in the day. That whole must-see kind of television where you had to watch the show because you had no idea what was going to happen. I mean, I've had my problems with the Attitude Era, and the whole Crash TV thing didn't always equate to the best form of television, but man, the shows were exciting back then. You can invest in what was happening in a 2-hour window and not get bored. Back when you had actual star power and the boys actually had fucking personality, that also helped. But I know that Backlash show is coming up in a couple weeks, and right now, they got a lot of work to do to get me invested. I mean, the SmackDown side of things isn't really cooking up any good material right now. Cody and Brock has some appeal on paper. I still think it would have been better with some kind of championship or stipulation on the line. That way there's a reason to care about who actually goes over. But, man, out of everything else they have announced right now, it's definitely a step down from where the hype was going into WrestleMania a month ago. And since we're still a little ways out from SummerSlam, these next few months are going to be pretty rough. But, I mean, that's not entirely out of the ordinary. There's always a down period in the WWE throughout the year. But I think we'll wrap it up on that note because I still got to get this uploaded and processed, and it's going to take me a little bit of time. So make sure y'all come back to check out the Friday show. And I think it's May the 6th that this WrestleMania Backlash show is taking place. So that'll be the next big premium live special we talk about. And yeah, I guess we'll check out there. Thanks for watching. Take care, all. Peace out.